Ferrari have decided to accelerate the next major upgrade package for the SF-24 and introduce it in a fortnight's time at the Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. This comes on the back of an atrocious weekend for the Scuderia team last time out in Canada, with both drivers DNFing in the race. And just to sum up how awful a race that was, here's Leclerc with his race engineer over the team radio.
If we box inters, we'll have to box for dries in 2 laps, and then we'll lose 40 seconds. With shit anyway. Up to you.
Now, one thing to stress with these acceleration of upgrades, it isn't actually because of what happened last time out in Canada. It's more to do with the fact that every other team is also bringing upgrades, major upgrades, to the Circuit de Catalunya. And of course, Ferrari want to do so as well, because that testing ground of that track is what every team knows at the back of their hand. They've tested for countless years at that circuit. And they simply just want to bring forward as many upgrades as they can to keep in touch with their rivals. And for this particular weekend, they're going to be introducing a brand new floor on the SF-24. Now, you could almost say this is going to be the 2.1 version of the SF-24 Evo package that they unveiled in Imola a couple of race weekends ago. Now, of course, in the time since then, Ferrari have had a couple of really contrasting results. On the one hand, we had the triumphant win of Leclerc around his home streets of Monaco, and then we've just had the disaster that was Canada. And I think Ferrari know they've got a couple of weaknesses that they need to iron out with these next couple of rounds of upgrades. And of course, that is all to do with qualifying and the tyre pressures that they run in qualifying, because the car is extremely dependent on the tyre pressures and getting them into the right working window to be able to get the maximum out of the SF-24 in qualifying trim. Because the car is, in a sense, so benign on their tyres, the warm-up is a major issue that is still yet to be rectified with this car. But before we go any further into the video, let me know your thoughts on this whole matter. Do you think these upgrades are going to be enough to maybe move them a bit closer to the front couple of teams? Is it going to keep them where they are? Do you think they'll be able to fight for a race win around the Circuit de Catalunya? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, outside of the major part coming to Barcelona, which is of course the floor as I just mentioned, there is going to be some other small upgrades that will arrive as well. Now, what those are, I don't really know, but we can take a bit of a guesstimation as to what they are. They could be kind of brake ducts, a few smaller tweaks to the rear ring end plates, for example. It could be a slight change on the halo. It could be a front wing tweak. Maybe one of the elements is going to change. Maybe one of the end plates is going to have a little bit of a variation to come into play with the floor. Because of course the floor is the major component of which a Formula 1 car in this era generates downforce and lap time. And so every other piece on the car, from the front all the way to the rear, has to be working in tandem with the floor and the Venturi tunnels. So getting the flow of air directed into the right area of which you want it to be is of paramount importance. Now, of course, originally these upgrades weren't going to be introduced for Spain. They were being primed and prepped for Silverstone, where they were going to have all of the components brought onto the car in one huge sweep. And that was to help introduce a more increased load on the car, as well as improving the overall aerodynamic balance of the SF-24, and of course, as I've just mentioned, help with the tyre warm-up issues that they have sometimes in qualifying. And there's one other reason why they would want to do that. Next race out is a sprint race weekend, and a lot of things can go wrong with that. So you really want to have the most amount of time with these upgrades to hone in on the data that you probably gather from FP1 and FP2, more than likely, to come up with a setup for FP3 and going into quali and race to be able to have the most extraction out of these upgrades. And you wouldn't be able to do that on a sprint weekend. We have Aston Martin, who is the famous example of that last season when they bought ending upgrades to a couple of sprint weekends, and it was a disaster for them. Now, how is this going to all play out for the team? Is it going to make them the dominant force in Formula One this season? I think we can say with quite a lot of certainty that's not going to be the case, because so many of the top teams will be bringing their first major upgrades for this year at Barcelona. For example, Red Bull will be bringing their first major upgrade of the season. And I would say much in the same way Ferrari's Imola upgrade, which took 25% of their overall budget cap for this year, Red Bull will be introducing something as similar to that as possible for them. And then of course McLaren have also stated they're bringing upgrades. Mercedes, as we know, are on a very aggressive upgrade strategy of bringing upgrades race weekend upon race weekend up until Silverstone. So I think we could see very much a status quo in terms of the pecking order, and there might be a few shifts in variations between the amount of lap time between the teams, or maybe perhaps one with the upgrades doesn't get it into the right working window, and for a couple of races they fall back until they optimize the new kind of balance that their cars have respectively with these upgrades. It's going to be a case of seeing who gets on top of everything quicker than the others, and seeing what plays out across these race weekends. So that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye out on, and of course to report back to you guys watching this on what these upgrades are going to be and the changes made to all of the cars, which I will of course be covering on this channel in a fortnight's time when we get the first pictures of all the teams and major upgrades for Barcelona. But what this will do is enable hopefully Ferrari to stay within that chasing pack, or the pack fighting for race wins and podiums and pole positions or top places during qualifying on a regular basis throughout the season. And perhaps there's a little bit of variables that come into play that enable certain teams to win at certain tracks and to get pole position or not at certain tracks as well. Right guys, that is the video. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like on this video, subscribe down below, and of course I will catch you all in another Formula One video shortly.